you watch more, College Football Nation, the SEC or the Big Ten? Well, we did that video as we matched up all the conferences. Check out the video links down in the comments section. Here we look at the SEC and break down the individual teams as we did with the Big Ten. SEC, 14 teams in 2023. Of course, Oklahoma and Texas jumping on board in 2024. Let's check out the viewer stats from this past football season. Alabama, the very best, possibly in all of college football. We'll wait until we get all the conferences done and all the teams across college football. But over 47 million folks watched Alabama on their network appearances. We do not have SEC network metrics here. This is on CBS, ABC, and ESPN for these SEC teams. For Bama, it's 47 plus million. That's 5.91 million per game. So we're just looking at conference games on this particular graphic first and foremost. And number 2 is Georgia at just under 41 million total for 8 conference games. We will take a look in a second at what networks picked up these games, but for Georgia in particular, they're boosted by the fact that CBS aired 5 of their 8 conference games. Next in line, you've got Tennessee coming in at just under 30 million total, just under 5 million per game, with 4 of those games on CBS. You have Auburn, despite another down season, at 6-7, coming in at number 4 in the SEC at just under 4 million per game. LSU's at number 5. On down the list, Missouri, of course, had to be boosted by playing more meaningful games than they've played in a decade, as they had a huge viewership total on CBS against both Tennessee and especially against Georgia. 7 million people watched Georgia take on Missouri in a key SEC Eastern Division matchup. Mizzou was the only team that really had a shot at Georgia last season in division play. And as we go down the list, I really think this is going to pan out well for the SEC in comparison to the other conferences, as more than 2 million people on average watched every team in the SEC. We left out South Carolina and Vandy. We will put them at the bottom of the list because South Carolina only played 2 games on network television, and those were boosted by appearances, especially against Georgia, which was the second-rated game of Week 2, and then also a game against Texas A&M. And then Vanderbilt only played 1 game. That was against Georgia. The rest were on the SEC network, the ACC network, and the CBS Sports network. And so you see in last place among the teams that qualified was Mississippi State. Again, 5 games on networks, 4 of those on ESPN, 1 on ESPN2, and Mississippi State still eclipsed over 10 million views total and over 2 million per game. The SEC and CBS have been synonymous for college football showcases since the early 1990s. This 2023 season historic because it's the last year that CBS is covering the SEC. And of course, the SEC has thrived with its biggest games on CBS. And it is certainly no coincidence. The biggest games are on CBS and they draw the biggest numbers. Therefore, Alabama had 5 of its 8 conference games on CBS. Georgia, 5 of 8 as well. Auburn, 2 out of their 5 that were in the rating. So the other 3 Auburn games were on the SEC network. And then on down the line, again, CBS showing the best teams. They also showed Tennessee 4 times as well. And by no coincidence, Tennessee was number 3 in the rankings. In total, ESPN showed the SEC 41 times and 4 games on ESPN2. And those are conference games only. When Alabama and Texas get together in the future, it of course will be an SEC conference game, but not so in 2023 on ESPN. The highest rated game on ESPN outside of Colorado, of course. They were the darlings, Coach Prime and the Buffs in 2023, but 8.7 million people watched Bama and Texas. Other notable games, of course, even eclipsing that one, although I mentioned the Bama-Texas game first because there was competition against that game. There were 10 or 12 other games on at the same time that people could watch, as opposed to LSU and Florida State. 9.1 million people watched it, so that was the highest rated game, most viewed game for an SEC non-conference game. But however, You had to watch that game if you were watching college football on that ABC on that Labor Day weekend. Other non-conference games eclipsing the 3 million mark included Georgia Tech. Now, these two teams usually play a noon game on the last weekend of the season, but it was moved to night, and it was on ABC, and they got over 5 million views for a fairly close game. Alabama, of course, challenged by South Florida. That was a surprise on ABC at 3:30 Eastern Time, and almost 5 million people watched that game as well. We see Miami, Texas A&M. That was a fairly entertaining game. The second weekend of the season, 4 million people watched it. Utah, Florida, that was the Thursday night game that was only challenged by one other game out of the Big Ten, Nebraska and Minnesota on that opening weekend. 3 million plus watched on ESPN. And also on that initial weekend, North Carolina, South Carolina on ABC at 3.4 million for a 3:30 Eastern Time game. The SEC had its shortest and least successful stint in the college football playoff since the first year of the playoff in 2014, as Alabama lost the first game in 2014, lost the first game at the Rose Bowl against Michigan in 2023. So the one college football playoff game for the SEC, the least in its 10-year history going back to 2014. But it was a big matchup and a big rating. The number one viewership game in all of college football for the entire season. Bama, Michigan, 27.7 million. After the national championship game, over 10 million people watched Georgia and Florida State as the third highest rated postseason game despite 63-3. And then right in order, the SEC and the Big Ten. Look at all those. This is the future of college football right here. In a nutshell, look at games number 4, 5, 6, and 8. Those are all the SEC against the Big Ten. And the only reason LSU and Wisconsin was eclipsed by Liberty and Oregon is because it was the Fiesta Bowl and it was played on ESPN rather than ESPN2 for the LSU-Wisconsin game. Clemson and Kentucky with the Wildcats showing up for the SEC at over 3 million. Texas A&M, Oklahoma State in the Texas Bowl had over 3 million views in a close competitive game. Auburn and Maryland there in the least watched SEC Bowl game on ABC. Bama and Georgia have owned the SEC on the field. They own the television sets as well. Tennessee with a good showing despite just a 8-4 season following 10-2 in 2022. So the Vols stay relevant, and of course they play Alabama every year, so that boosts the numbers as well. And also the interesting part going forward is, of course, the entry of Oklahoma and Texas into the SEC. They dominated the Big 12. Of course, we're going to get to the Big 12 and the ACC next, but we will see the gap, the void that is going to be left by Oklahoma and Texas leaving the Big 12 and most of those TV ratings behind as they join the SEC and bolster the SEC even more in its dominance against the landscape of college football. Check out the Big 10 video. Compare it to the SEC. It's awfully close, but we will have to give the nod to the SEC. Top to bottom, much stronger in regards to bringing viewers to the TV sets. Your thoughts down below. Please like the video and subscribe, of course, right here at the Voice of College Football.